Hey guys, it's Sarah here. So a fun theory out there is that Syrio and Jaqen Hagar may be the same person. A few people have requested that I cover this theory, so here it goes. This will be a book and show theory. First, let's talk about what we know about Syrio and Jaqen. So Syrio was a master swordsman and the first Sword of Braavos for 9 years. After the previous first Sword of Braavos died, the Sea Lord of Braavos sent for Syrio and asked him to look at the creature before him and tell him what he saw, as a test. Syrio truthfully told him that he saw a tomcat, and having passed the test was given the job. We also know that he somehow ended up in King's Landing, and Ned hired him to help teach Arya the basics of sword fighting in the water dancing style. Syrio focused Arya's training on truly seeing what was in front of her, along with being light of foot, silent, and balanced. He said she must forget her troubles if she wants to be truly present during fighting, and he taught her that every hurt was a lesson. He had her chasing cats and practicing blindfolded to help her use all of her senses. He also had her think like a warrior and anticipate moves of her enemies. Syrio was very protective of Arya and helped her escape capture after the Lannisters and Littlefinger turned on the Starks. He fought off 5 Lannister men and Meryn Trant of the Kingsguard so that she could escape, with only a broken wood sparring sword. And we don't know what becomes of him in the end. Some think he died, some think he was captured, and some think he escaped as he managed to knock out 5 of his foes, and of course, was a very talented swordsman. It's possible Syrio's still alive, because we know from the Hound that any boy with a sword could beat 3 Meryn Trants, so he might not have been that big of a fight. But that's not what this theory is focusing on. So anyways, Jaqen is a faceless man from Braavos, whose true identity cannot be known. However, his current identity at this time is of a Lorathi criminal. He spent some time in the black cells beneath King's Landing with Rorg and Biter before the 3 of them were caged and sent to the wall with Yoren. He asks Arya for help several times, and despite calling her boy, seems to know that she is a girl. After she helps him and the others escape death by fire, he grants her 3 deaths to repay the many-faced god back for the 3 lives she saved. At Harrenhal, Arya asks him to kill Chiswick and Weiss in the books, and in the show she asks him to kill Tickler and Amory Lorch. She names Jaqen himself as the 3rd name in order to get him to help her and her friends escape Harrenhal in return for unnaming him. Before departing, Jaqen gives Arya a coin and tells her to give it to any Braavosi man and say Valar Morghulis if she ever needs more help, and then he changes his face and leaves. Now in the show, Jaqen shows up again in the House of Black and White to help train Arya in the ways of the Faceless Men, but in the books this is someone else. So some people think that Syrio and Jaqen could be the same person for a number of reasons, but I think the show makes this theory a little bit more possible than the book does. But in the book and the show, both men take an interest in Arya and take protective roles over her. Both men have similar ways of speaking and address Arya in similar ways, and they train her to become a good fighter. Syrio believes there's only one god, the god of death, and we know Jaqen also believes in one god, the many-faced god, and he serves him deaths. Now in the books, Jaqen refers to this god as the red god, but in the show it's more like the god of death. We know that the many-faced god is promised deaths and should be granted only that number of deaths, which is why Jaqen only promised Arya 3 deaths in return for her saving him and his 2 companions. Some argue that since Syrio was such a strong swordsman, he should have been able to kill at least some of the Lannister guards when they were trying to take Arya in King's Landing, but instead he just knocks them out. He also could have tried to go for one of the fallen swords, like the steel swords that the guards were holding, and use that for the rest of the fight, but he doesn't. So some take this to believe that he's actually a faceless man and doesn't want to take lives that aren't his to take for the many-faced god. Syrio's training methods are also similar to those used by the House of Black and White, such as focus on being swift, silent, and practicing use of senses other than sight to become a good fighter. So Syrio uses a blindfold, the House of Black and White actually blinds Arya. So Syrio also tells her that she needs to forget her troubles if she wants to be a good fighter. And the Faceless Men tell Arya she needs to forget who she is to become a faceless man. Syrio also tells Arya that boy or girl, it doesn't matter, she's a sword, which is another form of telling Arya to forget her identity and become something else. Now in the show, it's still Jaqen training Arya, but in the book, like I said before, it's someone else who we know as the Kindly Man. So I guess you could still think of Syrio as being a faceless man, but it doesn't really tie in with Syrio being Jaqen, like the same person. So there are similarities between the two characters and their actions, but I think that while this is a fun theory, it's not very likely to be true, and here's why. Syrio's water dancing is not characteristic of the Faceless Men, and would have taken a long time to train and become a master swordsman. We also know that the Sea Lord of Braavos sent for him to replace his first sword, and for that to happen, Syrio would have had to be well known, a someone, which is something the Faceless Men try to avoid. They're more low-key. They're no ones. It also doesn't quite match up with the timeline, as we know Jaqen spent some time in the Black Cells under the Red Keep with Rorg and Biter, seemingly at the same time Syrio was training Arya in water dancing. So maybe Syrio was imprisoned after the fight with the Lannister guards, and then he changed his face after to become Jaqen, later being reunited with Arya on the way to the Wall. However, this is highly unlikely. I think that after assaulting so many Lannisters, he would have been killed, just like all of the other Starks and their guards and servants. There's also evidence to suggest that Jaqen is working with Rorg and Biter if you agree with Preston Jacobs' Faceless Men theory, which is linked below. Now, I normally don't really put a lot of faith in Preston Jacobs' theories for the most part. Sorry, Preston. It's just how it goes sometimes, I guess. But this one is one that I can stand behind. So, in his whole series of theory videos about the Faceless Men, there's one part that I want to bring up. So he calls Syrio the anti-Faceless Man for the reasons I mentioned, but he also points out that the Sea Lord of Braavos doesn't approve of the Faceless Men. He doesn't like them, and that Syrio was probably protecting him from assassinations. He also brings attention to the test that Syrio was given by the Sea Lord before he was hired, which was the cat test. So why would it be important for Syrio to know there was a cat in front of him unless it was glamoured in some way to look like something else? We do know that glamours dissolve before sharp eyes, and Syrio mentions truly seeing is the most important part of being a water dancer when he's training Arya. So, this makes for a good argument that Syrio is actually far from being a faceless man, and could actually be quite an enemy for them if they came face to face, as faceless men rely on glamours a lot for their disguises, along with changing their faces. From a writer's standpoint, it also doesn't really make sense or serve any sort of purpose for Syrio and Jaqen to be the same person in terms of plot or character development. Usually, you don't really do this when you're writing. You don't add things that don't progress the plot or character development. It just takes up space and it becomes boring. And I don't think George R. R. Martin would really resort to that. A more compelling theory is that Jaqen is the same person as the alchemist from A Feast for Crows, as his description when he changes his face before leaving Arya is identical to that of the alchemist in A Feast for Crows. A character named Pate meets this alchemist, and it is highly suggested that Pate has his face stolen after being murdered by the alchemist. And then the same Pate turns up later at the Citadel to greet Sam Tarly, but is acting out of the ordinary. So people believe that the alchemist was a faceless man, stole his face so he could get access to the Citadel, and this will certainly have the potential to progress certain plot points in the future, and is more viable with the timeline in A Song of Ice and Fire and what we know of Jaqen. It's also possible that he could just be a different faceless man, but I think the main thing here is that the appearance of Jaqen when he left Arya matches the appearance of the alchemist when he meets Pate. So anyways, there's some food for thought. I hope I didn't upset too many people here by, I guess, going against this fun theory, but I honestly think that while this theory is super cool, and it would be super heartwarming to know that Syrio was with Arya the whole time trying to help her out, I highly doubt that it's true. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. I hope to have more theories out soon. Feel free to leave any suggestions in the comments if you have anything you'd like me to cover. Cheers!